The air in Gotham was electric that night, crackling with anticipation. The city's elite had gathered for what was supposed to be the most glamorous night of the year, the 2025 Gotham Film Awards. Cameras flashed in rapid succession, catching every designer gown, every sparkling cufflink, every perfectly polished smile. For most, it was a night to celebrate artistry, to honor achievements in film, and to mingle with the people who shape Hollywood. But for Meghan Markle, this evening was about to spiral into something far more complicated than mere glitz and glamour. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine walking into a room where every step, every glance, every smile could become a headline. Now imagine entering that room with the awareness that the two people whose approval or disapproval could define how the night unfolded were actively avoiding you. That was Meghan's reality. Rihanna and A$AP Rocky, arguably the most influential celebrity couple in the room, had reportedly decided not to share a table with her at the refreshment lounge. At first glance, it might sound trivial. After all, it's just a table, right? But in Hollywood, where every gesture is dissected, every seating arrangement scrutinized, this was a move that would send shockwaves across social media, tabloids, and gossip columns alike. Rihanna, the global pop sensation turned fashion mogul, is known for her unshakable confidence and sharp social radar. She doesn't act on impulse. A$AP Rocky, equally commanding in his presence, has cultivated an aura of calm detachment, but when he makes a statement with his actions, it resonates loudly. For these two to actively avoid sitting with Meghan wasn't a coincidence. It was a calculated social maneuver, and the whispers in the room suggested that this was more than just a passing glance of disapproval. It was a silent message, broadcast in a crowded room full of Hollywood's most observant eyes. The Gotham Film Awards have always been a playground for power and prestige. Celebrities arrive with their entourage, strategically maneuver through the red carpet, pose for photos, and then enter a world where alliances, rivalries, and reputations are constantly in flux. Every glance, every handshake, every seat taken carries meaning. In this environment, even a simple act like refusing a seat can carry the weight of months, even years, of unspoken tension. So, what could have led to this moment? Was it a personal history between Meghan and Rihanna, something whispered behind closed doors? Or was it the culmination of an entire narrative built by the media, shaping perceptions before anyone had even exchanged a word? One thing was certain. The optics of this decision would be dissected endlessly, becoming a story that no Hollywood insider could ignore. As Meghan stepped into the venue, cameras captured every detail. The shimmer of her gown under the spotlights, the carefully composed smile, the subtle attempt at casual confidence. She waved to reporters, gracefully accepting their questions, but behind her poised exterior was the tension that only insiders could detect. The room buzzed with whispers. Who was standing where? Who would sit with whom? Who would be noticed? And who would be overlooked? Meghan's eyes scanned the room, catching glimpses of familiar faces, some warm, some indifferent, and some actively distant. And then there was the refreshment lounge, the scene of the moment that would become legendary in gossip circles. A space designed for casual mingling had become a battlefield of subtle power plays. The layout of the tables, the placement of drinks, the arrangement of seats. Every detail was a potential flashpoint. In a room where everyone knew everyone, where history and rumor coexist, the decision of Rihanna and A$AP Rocky to remain apart from Meghan wasn't merely a social preference. It was a statement. But what makes this story more compelling is the psychology behind celebrity interactions. Hollywood thrives on perception. People aren't just attending events. They're performing, crafting an image, testing alliances, and navigating social hierarchies. When Rihanna and A$AP Rocky allegedly refused to sit at the same table, they weren't just avoiding a person. They were signaling to the entire room. They were asserting boundaries, redefining alliances, and controlling the narrative without uttering a single word. In the context of Hollywood, silence can be louder than any statement, and avoidance can be more telling than confrontation. The public, of course, wouldn't immediately understand the gravity of the situation. Most people only saw the glitz and glamour of the red carpet, the dazzling outfits, the smiles and selfies. But those within the room, the reporters, the assistants, the security teams, recognized the significance immediately. Gossip travels fast in Hollywood, and by the time the refreshments began, the rumor had already spread. Rihanna and A$AP Rocky were keeping their distance from Meghan Markle. The story was no longer about fashion or film accolades. It had transformed into a narrative of social maneuvering, of power, influence, and subtle conflict. Yet Meghan's reaction remained inscrutable. She moved through the room with careful composure, nodding politely, engaging briefly with those nearby. But insiders noted a flicker of something else, hesitation, perhaps, or a moment of calculation. Would she confront the avoidance directly? Or would she navigate it with the strategic grace she's become known for? The audience watching from home would never see the unspoken tension, but those who were present understood that a simple decision about where to sit had ignited a storm of speculation, drama, and intrigue. This story isn't just about a table at an awards ceremony. It's about perception, power, and the invisible rules that govern celebrity culture. It's about the ways in which people communicate without speaking, about the signals sent through body language, seating arrangements, and subtle avoidance. And perhaps most importantly, it's about the story the media will tell, the narrative that transforms an ordinary night into a spectacle that the world can't stop talking about. So what happened next? Did Meghan manage to navigate the delicate social landscape of the Gotham Film Awards? Did Rihanna and A$AP Rocky maintain their distance for the entirety of the evening? Or did circumstances force an unexpected confrontation? And most importantly, what does this tell us about Hollywood's social hierarchy, the power of influence, and the ways in which even the smallest gestures can have monumental consequences? In a world where every glance can be interpreted, every whisper recorded, and every gesture magnified, this evening was more than just an awards ceremony. It was a study in human behavior, a lesson in the politics of celebrity, and a moment that would leave the internet buzzing for days, if not weeks. By the end of the night, no one would look at Meghan, Rihanna, or A$AP Rocky in quite the same way again. And yet, even with all the glitz, all the flashing cameras, and all the whispers, there was still more to come. A revelation that no one expected, a twist that would redefine the narrative and leave audiences questioning everything they thought they knew about Hollywood etiquette, celebrity feuds, and the delicate dance of social influence. The red carpet was more than just a pathway to the Gotham Film Awards. It was a stage, a runway, a battlefield disguised as glamour. Imagine thousands of eyes, all trained on every inch of every celebrity, analyzing the shimmer of fabric, the gleam of jewelry, the confidence in a smile. It's a place where every gesture carries meaning, and where a single misstep can become the talk of the town for weeks. And on this particular night, one arrival would ignite a storm that no one saw coming. Meghan Markle's entrance was precise, calculated, and flawless, at least on the surface. Cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing her elegant gown, the subtle sparkle of her jewelry, the grace in every step. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, fingers hovering over keyboards, ready to publish the first take of the night. But even amid the applause and the admiration, something undercurrents ran beneath the surface. A tension no one could ignore. Rihanna arrived moments later, the very air around her seeming to shift. There's something about her presence that commands attention without demanding it. She didn't just walk in. She entered with an aura, a kind of quiet authority that immediately separated her from the crowd. And then came A$AP Rocky, calm, measured, exuding a mix of cool confidence and subtle scrutiny. Together, they weren't just celebrities. They were power players, figures whose actions, even seemingly trivial ones, would set the tone for the evening. What struck everyone first wasn't the outfits or the smiles. It was the energy. Meghan moved toward the cameras with poise, but her eyes scanned the room with a mix of curiosity and calculation. She was aware of every movement, every glance, every subtle cue from the crowd. And she noticed Rihanna and A$AP Rocky almost immediately, not because they were glaring or hostile, but because of the magnetic way they seemed to dominate space without saying a word. The contrast between their entrances was subtle yet telling. Meghan's approach was calculated elegance, a careful performance designed to show composure. Rihanna's and Rocky's arrival radiated casual dominance, a confidence so complete it bordered on impenetrable. It wasn't just the fashion, it wasn't just the fame. It was an unspoken hierarchy being silently acknowledged by every attendee. And in the world of Hollywood power dynamics, these hierarchies matter. Every glance, every gesture, every shift in positioning communicates volumes, often louder than any words ever could. Reporters quickly began to murmur, whispering among themselves. "Did you see how Meghan just scanned the room?" one asked. "And Rihanna, she just doesn't even look her way." Another added, "Rocky is standing like he owns this place. You can feel it." And with that, the subtle tension started to make its way into headlines and tweets, seeding the first wave of speculation that would soon engulf social media. But what made this red carpet moment truly explosive wasn't just the stares or the whispers. It was the question of what would happen when these worlds collided inside. Meghan had entered not just as a royal figure, but as someone whose presence inherently provoked curiosity, speculation, and, in some circles, resentment. Rihanna and A$AP Rocky were figures who thrived in the intersection of celebrity, music, fashion, and social influence. When paths like these cross, it's never just about pleasantries. It's about power, perception, and territory. As Meghan moved past photographers, there were subtle signs that insiders noticed immediately. A fleeting hesitation in her step, a momentary flicker of uncertainty in her gaze. She was presenting confidence, yes, but she was also reading the room, sizing up the players, calculating the potential pitfalls. And perhaps most importantly, she was aware of Rihanna and Rocky's presence, their proximity, their postures, the ease with which they commanded attention. Meanwhile, Rihanna and Rocky weren't just attending. They were performing a careful dance of observation. Every step, every glance, every casual gesture seemed to broadcast a silent message. "We know who's here. We see the dynamics, and we are in control." The reporters didn't miss it, nor did the other celebrities. In a room where power is subtle yet omnipresent, these small cues are amplified, becoming a language of influence that only a few truly understand. The juxtaposition couldn't have been more striking. On one side, Meghan, radiating poised elegance but subtly tense, aware of every gaze and whisper. On the other, Rihanna and A$AP Rocky, exuding calm authority, seemingly unconcerned with the chaos swirling around them, yet perfectly attuned to every interaction. The stage was set, the players were positioned, and the tension in the room was palpable. And then, just as the evening seemed to settle into its predictable rhythm of applause and photo ops, something subtle but unmistakable happened. Meghan made a slight move toward the refreshment area. A gesture so ordinary it could have gone unnoticed. Yet, for those paying attention, it was the first overt step toward the moment that would soon dominate headlines. Rihanna and Rocky adjusted their positions almost simultaneously, a subtle pivot that spoke volumes. They didn't block her path, they didn't confront her, but they signaled, in the quietest way possible, a decision that would reverberate through the evening. They were keeping their distance. This was more than a simple act of avoidance. It was a calculated social maneuver. In Hollywood, these unspoken signals carry immense weight. They communicate alignment, preference, influence, and sometimes disapproval. And the subtle tension that had been brewing on the red carpet now had a clear trajectory. Meghan, entering as a figure of prominence herself, had encountered two individuals whose silent refusal would define the next chapter of the evening. For the attendees and insiders, this moment was electric. It was a test of social navigation, a trial in diplomacy and image management. Meghan's next moves would be scrutinized endlessly. Would she confront the avoidance, attempt to bypass it, or maintain grace under pressure, letting her composure speak louder than any confrontation could? These questions hung in the air, invisible yet undeniable, as the crowd moved deeper into the venue. And then there was the press. Camera lenses didn't just capture faces, they captured subtleties. Every half-smile, every fleeting glance, every shift in posture became material for headlines, tweets, and social media chatter. By the time Meghan reached the edge of the refreshment lounge, the first whispers had already spread. The most talked-about couple in the room was reportedly keeping their distance from her. It wasn't a secret yet, but it was on the verge of becoming one. The refreshments area at the 2025 Gotham Film Awards was supposed to be nothing more than a place to grab a glass of champagne, nibble on hors d'oeuvres, and exchange a few light pleasantries. But in Hollywood, nothing is ever that simple. Every gathering, no matter how casual it seems, is layered with meaning, influence, and the potential for scandal. That night, the Refreshments Lounge became the epicenter of the evening's most whispered drama. And Meghan Markle found herself at the center of it. It started quietly, almost imperceptibly. As Meghan approached the lounge, her eyes scanning the tables, she noticed a subtle shift in the room's energy. Rihanna and A$AP Rocky were already there, engaged in conversation with a small circle of friends, yet there was a deliberate space between them and Meghan. No one spoke aloud. No one made any overt gesture of disapproval, but the message was unmistakable. They were keeping their distance. In Hollywood, the optics of such a gesture can be devastating. A snub like this isn't just personal. It's public, it's symbolic, and it immediately becomes material for gossip. Within moments, insiders began murmuring. A photographer leaned toward a reporter. "Did you see that? They're not even pretending to be cordial." Another whispered back, "It's like they're sending a message without saying a word." And just like that, the story was born, circulating quietly at first, then spreading like wildfire across the room and, eventually, online. But why would Rihanna and Rocky make such a move? Was it a personal slight, a lingering grudge, or something more strategic? Hollywood is a place where past encounters, rumors, and reputations collide, and every action is interpreted through a lens of speculation. Perhaps it was a reaction to something Meghan had done, or allegedly done, in the past. Perhaps it was an unspoken response to a narrative that had been building in the tabloids for months. Or maybe it was simply a decision based on instinct, a calculation that keeping distance would serve their image better than engagement. Meghan, of course, noticed. There was no mistaking the subtle cues. The way Rihanna's eyes barely flicked toward her, the slight tilt of Rocky's head as he positioned himself across the table, the unspoken decision to leave a deliberate gap in the seating arrangement. Anyone else might have ignored it, brushed it off as coincidence. But Meghan is no stranger to navigating tense social situations. She paused for a moment, assessing her options, weighing every potential response. Should she approach, force a conversation, or maintain her composure and let the situation speak for itself? Each choice carried risk. Insiders watching the scene unfold knew this wasn't just about seating. It was about control. It was about influence. It was about sending a message in a way that words could never capture. Rihanna and Rocky weren't rude, they were deliberate. And that deliberate distance was a powerful statement, a subtle assertion of autonomy and authority in a room filled with celebrities accustomed to scrutiny. By now, whispers had started to reach the media tables. A few journalists, sensing a potential headline, began pulling out their phones, drafting preliminary notes, and sending discreet messages to editors. "Rihanna and Rocky snub Meghan at Refreshments," one wrote. Another added, "Potential drama brewing. Eyes on Meghan's response." Within minutes, what had been a private moment of subtle social maneuvering was becoming fodder for the internet, ready to be dissected, debated, and debated again. Meghan's inner circle, as always, was attuned to the subtleties of the moment. Advisors, assistants, and friends observed her carefully, offering quiet guidance. Smile, remain composed, engage selectively. In Hollywood, image is everything, and the slightest misstep can overshadow an entire evening. Meghan's choices in these few minutes would ripple across headlines, social media, and tabloid speculation for weeks. And yet, despite the tension, Meghan maintained her grace. She approached the refreshments with measured steps, carefully selecting a drink, engaging politely with nearby attendees, and projecting a calm exterior. But insiders could see the mental calculations behind her eyes. The internal weighing of strategy versus spontaneity, pride versus diplomacy, visibility versus discretion. It was a tightrope walk, and one misstep could ignite a storm. Meanwhile, Rihanna and Rocky continued to command attention without speaking a word. Their posture, their engagement with the small group around them, even their minor gestures, the way Rihanna adjusted her hair, the way Rocky tilted his head in conversation. were all signals of unspoken control. Hollywood is a place where every gesture is scrutinized, and those who understand the subtle language of influence can communicate volumes without uttering a single syllable. The tension in the room didn't go unnoticed by other celebrities. Some watched with curiosity, some with envy, and others with amusement. Whispers traveled quickly. Did you see how they're avoiding her? I wonder if this is about that old story from last year. This is going to be all over social media by tomorrow. Within minutes, the rumor had taken on a life of its own, spreading beyond the walls of the Gotham Film Awards and into the digital world, where speculation thrives and facts are often secondary to narrative. And then, just as Meghan began to navigate the social minefield of the Refreshments area, another layer of intrigue was introduced. A server accidentally brushed past her arm, spilling a small drink, which she handled with quiet composure, deflecting potential embarrassment. But the cameras caught it, and the moment became a talking point. Some would see it as an unfortunate mishap, others as a metaphor for the evening itself. An unexpected disruption in an otherwise meticulously curated environment. In Hollywood, timing is everything. Every glance, every gesture, every accidental encounter can amplify or defuse tension. Meghan's poised handling of the moment contrasted sharply with the invisible distance maintained by Rihanna and Rocky. The subtle drama was already unfolding, and everyone in the room, celebrities, press, and insiders alike, was aware that this was the kind of moment that could define the narrative of the evening. The rumors began to take on a life of their own. Conversations at nearby tables speculated about the reasons for the snub. Some suggested it was personal, rooted in past misunderstandings. Others posited that it was strategic, a calculated move to assert dominance or control the narrative. Social media would later explode with hashtags, fan theories, and endless commentary. But in the room at that moment, it was all whispered speculation, a tension simmering beneath the surface that no one could ignore. And yet, Meghan's response was careful, deliberate, and almost imperceptible. She didn't confront. She didn't complain. She navigated the situation with the grace expected of someone constantly under scrutiny. But those paying close attention noticed the subtle signs. A pause before speaking, a slight adjustment in stance, a measured smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. Every micro-expression was a window into the unspoken narrative of the evening. By the time the Refreshments portion of the evening was in full swing, the rumor had solidified into a storyline. Rihanna and A$AP Rocky had refused to sit with Meghan Markle. What had started as a subtle gesture had become a defining moment, a social chess move that would dominate conversation long after the awards themselves concluded. Hollywood thrives on these stories, the unspoken conflicts, the strategic maneuvering, the carefully curated appearances, and tonight was no exception. But what no one yet realized was that the story was only beginning. The rumor was the spark, but the fire was about to ignite in ways that would surprise even the most seasoned insiders. The dynamics at the Refreshments table were setting the stage for an evening filled with intrigue, emotion, and dramatic revelations. And as Meghan continued to navigate the delicate balance of composure and strategy, the question on everyone's mind remained: how would this tension play out? The moment Meghan Markle realized the distance Rihanna and A$AP Rocky were keeping was intentional, a subtle shift rippled through her composure. Hollywood had trained her to navigate scrutiny, to smile under pressure, to maintain poise even when tension bubbled beneath the surface. But this silent avoidance was different. It wasn't a critique of her work or a paparazzi-fueled misunderstanding. It was personal, calculated, and visible to everyone paying attention. The first instinct, the part of Meghan that had survived countless high-profile encounters, whispered to remain calm, to hold her ground, and to move with grace. Yet even as she attempted to project composure, there was a flicker in her eyes, a micro-expression that those trained to read nuance could detect immediately. For a moment, the elegance she cultivated with years of public life was met with something unspoken but undeniable, the sting of exclusion. As Meghan approached the Refreshments table, she paused. The room was buzzing with the quiet hum of conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the subtle undercurrent of whispers. Every head turned ever so slightly toward the trio of celebrities maintaining their distance. She assessed her surroundings quickly. There were photographers, other celebrities, servers moving between tables, and guests strategically positioning themselves to witness any social interactions that might erupt. Hollywood is a theater, and tonight the stage was set perfectly. The decision that faced her wasn't just about etiquette, it was strategic. Meghan could either attempt to force engagement with Rihanna and Rocky, a risky move that might appear desperate or confrontational, or she could assert her own presence subtly, demonstrating that she didn't need validation from anyone, no matter how influential. Her advisors, standing slightly behind, whispered discreetly, "Keep composure. Let your actions speak louder than confrontation." Observe. In Hollywood, these silent cues matter just as much as words. Meghan chose observation first. She engaged with nearby attendees, exchanging polite smiles and brief conversation, subtly projecting an aura of calm control. Yet every interaction was calculated, a mix of diplomacy and self-protection. Even as she navigated the room, the whispers didn't stop. Attendees noticed the contrast. The poised royal versus the celebrities deliberately keeping their distance. The cameras captured it all, even the subtleties. Meghan's careful hand movements, the tilt of her head, the pauses in her responses. The tension in the room was compounded by the nature of celebrity dynamics. Hollywood thrives on perception. A minor social snub can become a narrative catastrophe, amplified by tabloids and social media in hours. Meghan understood this. She knew that even a momentary loss of composure could be dissected endlessly. Yet the challenge wasn't just about maintaining appearances, it was about controlling the narrative. She had to manage not only how she was perceived in the moment, but also how the story might evolve in the hours and days to come. As she moved subtly through the lounge, Meghan's mind was racing. Each calculated smile, each polite exchange, each measured step was a part of a larger strategy. She wasn't just reacting to a single moment. She was preparing for the potential fallout. Every photographer's lens, every insider's whisper, every observer's judgment could become part of the narrative that defined the evening. And in a room full of highly influential figures, control over perception is power. Yet, despite the tension, Meghan's public persona remained intact. She didn't confront, she didn't complain, and she didn't display overt frustration. But insiders could see the subtleties, the slight hesitation before joining a conversation, the controlled breathing that masked the inner calculation, the micro-adjustments in posture that signaled awareness of every glance. These micro-behaviors revealed an intricate interplay between public image, personal pride, and strategic calculation. Observers began to note the interplay between Meghan's composed approach and the deliberate avoidance by Rihanna and Rocky. Every pause, every glance, every gesture was scrutinized. Some guests leaned closer to whisper theories. "She's handling it well, but you can see she's calculating her next move. I wonder if she expected this." They've made their stance clear. Even the servers and event staff, typically invisible in these interactions, felt the shift in energy. A simple tray of drinks became a conduit for observation, and the room seemed to contract around the tension at that table. Social media was not yet aware, but the room itself was acutely conscious of the developing narrative. Meghan's reaction, carefully composed yet subtly charged with awareness, was a masterclass in controlled response. She acknowledged those who spoke to her politely, offered warm smiles, and maintained a demeanor that balanced elegance with self-assurance. But behind the calm exterior was a mind analyzing, predicting, and preparing for every possible social maneuver that could unfold next. The dynamic wasn't lost on other attendees either. Some watched with admiration, noting the way she maintained composure under pressure. Others viewed it as an impending clash, waiting for a misstep that would provide fodder for gossip. And throughout it all, Meghan remained acutely aware of the symbolic nature of the moment. The distance maintained by Rihanna and Rocky wasn't just about physical space. It was a message, an assertion of influence and boundaries that had ramifications far beyond the lounge. Then, something subtle yet profound occurred. Meghan's gaze briefly met Rihanna's across the room. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible to an untrained eye, yet packed with unspoken tension. Was it recognition? Was it a challenge? Was it an attempt to gauge whether the snub was intentional or merely circumstantial? In that instant, The entire psychology of the interaction crystallized. Hollywood is a game of perception, and every glance carries potential consequences. The staff and insiders noted the moment immediately. "Did you see that?" whispered one assistant. "That's not just looking, she's sending a message." Another murmured, "Rihanna didn't flinch. That's deliberate." Every observer, from reporters to fellow celebrities, sensed the weight of what was happening. And while Meghan's reaction remained calm outwardly, internally it was a complex calculation of influence, strategy, and personal diplomacy. It was at this juncture that Meghan made her move, not toward confrontation, but toward subtle assertion. She positioned herself at a strategic point near the refreshments, engaging with other high-profile attendees who could amplify her visibility. By doing so, she demonstrated social agility. She wasn't sidelined, she wasn't ignored, and she didn't allow the snub to define her presence. In Hollywood, this kind of strategic repositioning is an art form, balancing assertiveness with grace. Yet, despite her careful management, the atmosphere remained charged. Rihanna and Rocky continued their subtle avoidance, and the observers were keenly aware that something was unfolding, something that extended beyond ordinary social interaction. The contrast between Meghan's controlled response and the deliberate distance maintained by the couple created a tension that was palpable to anyone paying attention. Every action, every glance, every micro-expression became a story, a signal, a potential headline waiting to be written. And just as Meghan seemed to navigate the social landscape with measured poise, the whispers in the room began to shift into speculation. Observers debated the meaning behind the avoidance. Was it personal? Strategic? A signal to others in the room? The uncertainty fueled intrigue, with each guest interpreting the interaction through their own lens of perception and experience. In Hollywood, perception is reality, and every subtle action was now contributing to a narrative that would grow exponentially as the night progressed. The moment had become more than a simple reaction. Meghan's composure, her awareness, her strategic engagement with the room. All of it was a response not only to the immediate tension, but to the potential social reverberations. And yet, even with all her careful navigation, she could not foresee what was about to happen next. The subtle dynamics, the silent communication, and the energy in the room were converging toward a moment that would shift the evening in ways no one expected. While Meghan navigated the charged energy of the refreshments area, Rihanna's experience of the evening was entirely different, but equally calculated. Most people only see the glitz and glamour of the red carpet, the perfectly styled hair, the designer gowns, and the flashing cameras. But behind the polished exterior, there's an intricate web of observation, strategy, and influence at play, and Rihanna is a master of this invisible art. From the moment she stepped onto the red carpet, Rihanna sensed the undercurrents of the evening. The flashes of cameras, the murmurs of fans, and the subtle glances from other attendees all fed into a larger picture. Perception is everything. Rihanna has built a career not just on talent, but on the ability to control narrative, to command presence, and to influence both audiences and peers without overt displays of dominance. Her eyes scanned the room as she moved with a confident grace, noting every cluster of conversation, every subtle tension, every whispered exchange. And then she saw Meghan. The moment was brief, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. Rihanna noticed Meghan's approach, the poised stride, the carefully controlled composure. She observed the slight micro-expressions, the glances toward her direction, the subtle attempt to gauge the room. In that instant, Rihanna made a deliberate choice, a choice to maintain a certain distance, not out of hostility, but as a measure of strategic self-possession. Rihanna's decision wasn't impulsive. It was the result of careful consideration, rooted in years of navigating public life. She understands the power of nonverbal communication, of sending signals without words, and of maintaining boundaries in spaces saturated with observation. Choosing to keep distance was not a slight in the conventional sense. It was an assertion of control, a subtle delineation of space in a room where influence and perception are everything. A$AP Rocky, ever attentive and equally strategic, mirrored her approach, standing slightly behind, observing and reading the room with a quiet intensity, he too recognized the implications of interaction, or lack thereof. Together, the couple created a visible boundary, a social signal that was impossible to ignore. Every movement was deliberate. The placement of chairs, the angle of their bodies, the direction of their gaze. It wasn't just avoidance. It was communication without a single word spoken. Inside Rihanna's mind, the reasoning was multi-layered. Part of it was instinctive, an immediate read of the energy Meghan carried, the potential for social tension, and the importance of controlling perception. Part of it was calculated, a conscious decision to maintain autonomy and influence, to set boundaries that reinforced their social position. And part of it was anticipatory, preparing for the ways in which the evening might unfold, understanding that every glance and gesture would be scrutinized, recorded, and analyzed by cameras, reporters, and onlookers. Rihanna's team was, of course, aligned with this perspective. Advisors whispered reminders, maintain composure, project confidence, and never allow the situation to be misinterpreted as insecurity or pettiness. Every step was coordinated, every pause intentional. In Hollywood, these micro-decisions are as vital as the major public appearances. One misread signal can ripple through the room, altering dynamics and shifting alliances. Meanwhile, Rihanna's awareness extended beyond Meghan. She monitored the reactions of other attendees, the subtle glances of bystanders, the whispers of reporters, and the shifting positions of fellow celebrities. Every observer was part of the social equation, and Rihanna's choices would influence not only Meghan's experience, but the perception of the room as a whole. Her ability to remain calm, composed, and strategically distant amplified her influence, creating a ripple effect that heightened the tension of the evening. The refreshment area, which seemed mundane to the casual observer, became a stage for this unspoken drama. Rihanna understood that every subtle move, the tilt of her head, the adjustment of her posture, the choice of whom to engage with, would be interpreted as deliberate. It wasn't just about Meghan. It was about demonstrating authority, control, and the capacity to shape the narrative without saying a word. Rocky, always attuned to nuances, reinforced this approach. He maintained a measured engagement with others, projecting calm authority while subtly reinforcing the social boundary. Their coordinated actions created a visible yet invisible signal. Engagement is selective, boundaries are firm, and influence is maintained without confrontation. Observers noticed the tension but couldn't fully articulate it. It was felt more than spoken. Even as Meghan approached with careful poise, Rihanna's internal calculus didn't waver. She understood the optics, the stakes, and the potential repercussions. Hollywood is a world where gestures are magnified, where avoidance can speak louder than confrontation, and where perception often outweighs reality. By choosing distance, Rihanna wasn't rejecting Meghan personally. She was asserting a principle that has guided her interactions throughout her career: maintain control, influence the narrative, and let subtlety speak louder than words. And yet, amidst all the strategy, there was an undercurrent of awareness of how the interaction would be perceived outside the room. Rihanna knows that the cameras catch even the smallest gestures, that social media will analyze every movement, and that public perception can escalate even the quietest decisions into major headlines. Her choice, while deliberate and grounded in personal strategy, also carried the weight of public scrutiny. Every glance, every pause, every shift in position was now part of a larger narrative being constructed by observers, both in the room and beyond. The dynamic between Meghan and Rihanna, with Rocky subtly reinforcing the boundary, created a ripple effect. Other attendees sensed it, reporters noted it, and even the staff navigating the room felt the tension. What began as a seemingly minor social maneuver had escalated into the defining interaction of the evening. Observers whispered theories. Was it a personal issue? A clash of egos? A strategic demonstration of power? No one had a definitive answer, and that uncertainty made the moment all the more compelling. As Rihanna adjusted slightly in her seat, subtly redirecting a conversation to maintain distance, she reinforced her own position without confrontation. Her composure, her awareness, and her control over the situation made a statement that extended beyond personal preference. It was a demonstration of influence, An example of social mastery in an environment where every gesture is amplified. And yet, despite the control, Rihanna knew that the night was far from over. The subtle tension she and Rocky had created was only the beginning. Hollywood thrives on escalation, on unexpected twists, and on moments that turn whispers into headlines. While Meghan navigated the scene with poise, the undercurrents of influence, strategy, and perception were preparing to converge in ways that would surprise everyone in the room. By the time the refreshments area had settled into what appeared to be casual mingling, the tension that had been quietly simmering behind polite smiles and calculated gestures began to manifest in the first public whispers. In Hollywood, gossip travels faster than champagne bubbles, and by now, the undercurrent of the evening had become impossible to ignore. A subtle glance, a slight hesitation, a strategically positioned table. These were no longer just social maneuvers. They were starting to tell a story. It began with a photographer positioned just beyond the refreshment table. He wasn't trying to catch a scandal. He was simply doing his job, capturing the fluid interactions of the evening. But when Meghan approached and paused near the edge of the lounge, the lens caught something subtle yet significant. Rihanna and A$AP Rocky were clearly engaged with others, deliberately leaving space between themselves and her. The microcosm of body language, the tilt of heads, the slight adjustment of posture, the way Rocky's hand rested near his drink rather than extending toward Meghan, was enough to hint at a silent snub. The photograph was shared almost immediately with a reporter at a nearby desk, who leaned in, eyes widening. "Do you see this?" they murmured. "This isn't casual. They're keeping distance." That single observation became the spark that ignited the first public whisper of what was quickly becoming a larger story. Within moments, the information traveled through the room like wildfire. Servers whispered to assistants, assistants whispered to journalists, journalists whispered to editors. By the time Meghan had taken a small sip of her drink, the room had collectively recognized the narrative. A subtle social divide had formed, and everyone was watching. The first public whisper wasn't about confrontation, it was about observation. Attendees noted Meghan's controlled composure, her careful engagement with the room, and the deliberate distance maintained by Rihanna and Rocky. Yet even as they whispered, speculation began to take hold. "Did you notice how they're avoiding her?" one guest asked another. "I think it's intentional," replied the second. "It's subtle, but it's there." This was the seed of the story, the initial spark that would eventually explode into headlines, hashtags, and social media debates. Meanwhile, Meghan was aware of the eyes on her. Hollywood teaches its inhabitants to sense attention, even when it's silent, and Meghan felt the collective scrutiny in the room. Every glance in her direction, every whisper that traveled near enough to be overheard, added weight to her decisions. She remained poised, smiling politely, engaging in light conversation, and maintaining a calm exterior, but internally, she was calculating every potential move. Should she confront the snub? Attempt to bridge the gap with Rihanna and Rocky? Or continue to assert herself through composure alone? Rihanna and Rocky, meanwhile, were fully aware that their subtle avoidance had not gone unnoticed. But their awareness didn't induce worry or hesitation. It reinforced their strategy. By maintaining control over the narrative without overt confrontation, they effectively set the terms of social engagement. In Hollywood, this type of maneuvering is often more powerful than a public statement. A glance, a slight shift in posture, or a deliberate space can communicate influence more effectively than words ever could. It wasn't long before the whispers extended beyond the immediate room. A freelance journalist posted a brief observation on social media, noting the perceived tension and the strategic positioning of the table. The post was vague but suggestive, hinting at an underlying story without providing specifics. Within minutes, likes, shares, and comments began to proliferate. "Did you see this?" one user commented. "Meghan's getting side-eyed by Rihanna and Rocky." Another wrote, "This is going to be the talk of the awards tonight." In the digital age, a single whisper can snowball into a viral narrative almost instantly. The first public whisper didn't just affect Meghan, it began to influence the entire room. Other celebrities noticed the subtle divide and adjusted their interactions accordingly. Some hesitated to approach Meghan, unsure how to navigate the tension. Others leaned in, attempting to align themselves with one side or the other. In a space where perception is reality, the ripple effect of a single social maneuver can be immense. The room was now a stage for an unspoken drama, and everyone had become both audience and participant. At this moment, Meghan's internal strategy shifted slightly. She recognized that she couldn't control the whispers, the cameras, or the social media speculation. What she could control was her reaction, her engagement, and her visibility. She moved subtly through the room, engaging with other high-profile attendees, using her presence to assert influence without confronting the source of the tension directly. It was a delicate balance. Too much engagement could be seen as overcompensation, too little could be interpreted as weakness. As the first whispers gained momentum, they also began to take on layers of narrative that extended far beyond the room. By now, a small circle of journalists was discussing potential headlines. Rihanna and A$AP Rocky snub Meghan Markle at Gotham Film Awards. Subtle social divide sparks tension among celebrities. Hollywood power plays at the refreshment table. The room was still alive with polite conversation, champagne clinking, and laughter, but underneath, a silent drama was unfolding that would dominate headlines long after the evening ended. And yet, despite the growing whispers, Meghan remained composed. Her strategy relied on visibility, grace, and subtle influence. Every interaction she engaged in, every smile she offered, every polite acknowledgement was part of a calculated performance that communicated confidence without confrontation. Observers noted it, reporters captured it, and the subtle contrast with Rihanna and Rocky's deliberate avoidance heightened the tension even further. By the time the first public whisper had fully taken hold, the narrative was clear. The evening was no longer just about awards and recognition. It was about influence, power, and the subtle, almost invisible, dynamics that govern celebrity interactions. And while Meghan's response was careful and measured, the whispers ensured that every attendee, every journalist, and eventually every social media follower would be paying attention, watching for the next move. By now, the initial whispers had grown into a palpable tension that pulsed through the Gotham Film Awards venue like electricity. The subtle social dynamics that had started with Meghan's approach to the refreshments area and Rihanna and A$AP Rocky's deliberate distancing were no longer contained. They had spread, influencing the behavior of everyone in the room. In Hollywood, once whispers cross the threshold into perception, tension escalates quickly. And this night was a masterclass in that exact phenomenon. Meghan's careful navigation of the room had not gone unnoticed. Observers began to see patterns. The way she positioned herself near the edge of conversations, the brief pauses before speaking, the subtle shifts in her posture. It was clear she was aware of the distance maintained by Rihanna and Rocky, and every calculated interaction was being interpreted as a potential response to the unspoken snub. Every micro-expression, every glance, every measured smile was analyzed by onlookers and staff alike. In a room full of industry veterans, these cues are the language of influence, and Meghan was speaking fluently. Meanwhile, Rihanna and Rocky had not relaxed. Their decision to maintain distance was a strategy, not a statement of aggression. But strategy in Hollywood often carries perception as a silent weapon. Every guest in the room began to sense that something was unfolding. A story without dialogue, a performance of influence and social navigation that was impossible to ignore. Even the servers, moving between tables, seemed to feel the weight of the unspoken tension. A dropped napkin or a misstep would have been magnified in such an atmosphere, yet everyone adapted to the invisible pressure. The escalation began subtly, almost imperceptibly. Meghan engaged in polite conversation with a nearby group of attendees, and cameras caught her laughter, her hand gestures, the tilt of her head. But just as she was in mid-exchange, one of the photographers, sensing a potential headline, leaned closer to capture a shot that would frame the story. Meghan in proximity to Rihanna and Rocky, but unmistakably separated from them. It was a perfect visual representation of the tension that had become the defining narrative of the night. Observers, both in the room and online as images began to leak, started to connect dots that may or may not have existed. Some interpreted the distance as personal animosity. Others suggested a power play or a subtle warning. In Hollywood, Interpretation often outweighs reality, and the escalation of tension thrives in ambiguity. By now, the room was buzzing, not with the casual chatter of a celebration, but with speculation, analysis, and heightened awareness of every movement. Meghan's inner circle began to notice the intensifying gaze of cameras and the murmurs spreading throughout the room. Advisors subtly signaled for her to maintain composure, to engage strategically, and to avoid any overt gestures that could be misinterpreted. Every decision became a balancing act. Smile too much, and it could appear forced. Smile too little, and it could signal displeasure. Every interaction, every sip of champagne, every adjustment in posture became a potential headline waiting to happen. The subtle escalation of tension had secondary effects as well. Other attendees began to unconsciously mirror the dynamics. Some stepped closer to Rihanna and Rocky, signaling tacit alignment. Others hesitated before approaching Meghan, unsure of how to navigate the charged atmosphere. In a social ecosystem where influence is currency, these minor adjustments reinforced the divide. What had started as a personal maneuver had expanded into a full-scale social phenomenon within the room. Rihanna, ever perceptive, noticed the shift in energy. She adjusted her posture slightly, maintained her engagement with a small circle of trusted peers, and allowed the tension to amplify without needing to speak. Rocky mirrored her subtly, his body language signaling control and confidence. The duo's decision to avoid overt confrontation, combined with the growing awareness of observers, created a tension that was both silent and unmistakable. Hollywood thrives on such moments. Unspoken narratives, invisible hierarchies, and the dramatic escalation of subtle actions. Meanwhile, Meghan had begun to recognize the social landscape for what it truly was. Every gesture, every glance, every measured interaction was part of a complex interplay of influence. She realized that this wasn't just about her or the avoidance. It was about perception, about how influence and power are communicated in a space saturated with scrutiny. Her response had to be measured yet assertive, calm yet visible, strategic yet emotionally resonant. In short, she had to navigate the tension without allowing it to define her. And yet, despite her careful strategy, the energy in the room continued to escalate. Photographers adjusted their positions, capturing more angles, more interactions, more micro-expressions. Reporters leaned closer, asking subtle questions to insiders. Do you think this is intentional? What does this mean for the evening? Are they signaling something we don't know? Every answer, or lack thereof, only fueled speculation. The tension had become a narrative in its own right, independent of the awards or the intended festivities. As the night progressed, even small incidents were magnified. A brief glance in Meghan's direction, a slight adjustment of Rocky's seating, a casual laugh from Rihanna, all were parsed and reinterpreted. In Hollywood, escalation is exponential. Once the narrative exists, every interaction feeds into it. The tension that began as subtle avoidance had now become a defining feature of the evening, coloring every social exchange, every photograph, every whispered conversation. And yet, amid the rising stakes, Meghan remained calculated. Her engagement was precise, her smiles measured, and her posture unwavering. But inside, she was aware of the intensity building, the undercurrents growing stronger. She understood that this night was no longer about awards or recognition. It was about influence, perception, and the invisible chessboard of social hierarchy. Every step she took, every conversation she engaged in, would be scrutinized not just tonight, but for weeks to come. Rihanna, sensing the escalation, maintained her strategy. The subtle signals, the measured distance, the deliberate avoidance, it all served to amplify the tension without needing to speak. And as observers noted the contrast between Meghan's composed poise and the calculated positioning of Rihanna and Rocky, the evening reached a heightened state of social drama. But just as it seemed the tension had peaked, an unexpected ripple began to spread through the room. A casual observer, a fellow celebrity, an influential insider, made a comment, a joke, or perhaps an offhand remark. Whatever it was, it acted as a catalyst, threatening to transform silent tension into an outright spectacle. The eyes of the room shifted. Conversations paused. The camera lenses pivoted. And in that instant, The delicate social balance was on the verge of tipping. By now, the atmosphere at the Gotham Film Awards had reached a level of tension that was almost tangible. The quiet whispers had grown into an undercurrent of scrutiny, and every glance, every gesture, every measured movement was being observed and interpreted. It was in this charged environment that the first subtle confrontation occurred, a moment so quiet, so understated, yet so powerful that those present felt it immediately. Meghan, navigating the refreshments area with calculated composure, found herself momentarily near Rihanna and A$AP Rocky. The distance between them, maintained deliberately throughout the evening, was suddenly punctuated by a shared physical space, a narrow corridor between tables, a brief alignment as attendees shifted positions. In that instant, body language became a language in itself. Meghan's posture remained poised, her eyes calm yet observant. Rihanna, ever perceptive, mirrored a slight adjustment in stance, a subtle reinforcement of the boundary. Rocky, as always, maintained his quiet intensity, watching both the room and the interaction unfold. It was a confrontation without words. There was no harsh tone, no overt accusation, no dramatic gesture. Yet everyone in the room sensed the intensity. The subtle cues, a tilt of the head, a deliberate pause in movement, a faint but deliberate gaze, communicated volumes. Those trained to read such micro-expressions understood immediately. This was a test of presence, influence, and composure. Each participant was asserting control, not through confrontation, but through deliberate social signaling. Observers nearby began to murmur, sensing the weight of the moment. A server paused mid-step, unsure whether to move forward. A photographer adjusted their angle, capturing the slight alignment in body language. Attendees leaned subtly, straining to catch the nuances of what was unfolding. In Hollywood, such subtle confrontations are far more impactful than overt clashes, for they allow the tension to exist both in reality and in perception, creating a narrative that observers can fill with speculation. Meghan's approach to the moment was masterful. She didn't flinch. She didn't overcompensate. She maintained her presence, projecting calm authority while simultaneously observing the subtle signals emanating from Rihanna and Rocky. Her inner calculations were rapid. Assess the intention, gauge the potential consequences, determine the appropriate response, all without disrupting the carefully balanced energy of the room. Every movement was deliberate, every micro-expression a carefully weighted decision. Rihanna's awareness of the impact was equally precise. She understood that the confrontation, subtle as it was, could send ripples far beyond the immediate vicinity. By maintaining her composure and continuing the deliberate distance, she reinforced the silent narrative of control. Rocky's role was complementary. His quiet intensity acted as a stabilizing force, ensuring that the subtle confrontation maintained its equilibrium and communicated influence without aggression. The subtle confrontation had immediate consequences. Other attendees began adjusting their behavior in response. Some moved closer to Meghan, seeking alignment or perhaps protection. Others hesitated, unsure how to interpret the unspoken dynamics. Every observer, from celebrities to staff, sensed the tension, and the energy in the room shifted accordingly. This was no longer a simple social snub. It was a carefully choreographed dance of influence and perception. Social media, though not yet fully aware of the moment, was about to amplify it. One attendee, a well-connected influencer, discreetly sent a photograph of the alignment to a contact, captioned with a suggestive note about the tension in the room. Within minutes, digital whispers began to circulate. Rihanna and A$AP Rocky maintaining distance from Meghan Markle at Gotham Film Awards, subtle Hollywood power play caught in the act. The photograph, innocuous on its own, became a catalyst for widespread speculation once contextualized by observers who understood the weight of subtle confrontation. Meghan, aware that perception is as critical as reality in such moments, continued to navigate the situation with finesse. She engaged politely with those around her, offering measured smiles and strategic conversation, projecting an image of calm authority while silently reinforcing her presence. Her calculated approach highlighted a key principle in high-stakes social environments. Influence is most potent when it appears effortless. The room itself seemed to respond to the unfolding subtle confrontation. Conversation slowed, the hum of activity dipped slightly, and the collective gaze of attendees often drifted toward the trio. Even staff, trained to move fluidly and unobtrusively, became conscious of the heightened energy, adjusting their movements to avoid interfering with the charge dynamic. The subtle confrontation had effectively reshaped the social landscape of the refreshments area, establishing invisible boundaries and defining the flow of interaction for the rest of the evening. And yet, despite the controlled and calculated nature of the encounter, there was an undeniable emotional undercurrent. Meghan's composure masked a complex internal dialogue. Pride, strategy, awareness, and the subtle sting of exclusion all coexisted, creating a tension that was both personal and performative. Rihanna, on the other hand, remained outwardly calm but acutely aware of the narrative being constructed, not just in the room, but in the minds of every observer who would later recount the story. As the evening progressed, the subtle confrontation began to influence subsequent interactions. Other celebrities adjusted their positions, conversations, and engagements in response to the dynamics between Meghan, Rihanna, and Rocky. The ripple effect was profound. What started as a single, silent assertion of boundaries had now cascaded into a network of social recalibration, affecting behavior, observation, and perception across the entire venue. Just as the subtle confrontation reached a delicate peak, the next unexpected variable entered the scene. A celebrity outside the immediate circle made a comment loud enough to be overheard, a remark intended as humor but perceived as pointed. The energy shifted once more.